Dr. Linda Berberich. She's a founder and chief learning architect at Linda B. Learning. It's a consulting company focused on innovation and learning design based in the greater Seattle area. And due to time constraints, I'm going to shorten these, but and then we also have Emily, who I apologize, Emily, for all the trouble. Emily is
It's all good.
designer, brand strategist, and social entrepreneur. She is the founder of Collective Flow Consulting, designing brands and building programs for social impact by leading with purpose. And welcome, both of you. I'm so happy you're here. It was quite a journey.
It was, but here we are.
Yes.
Thank you for that introduction. Yes, and Linda and I have very different backgrounds, but we come to this topic pretty enthusiastic. And since we had a little bit of a rocky start, this will be a perfect segue also. And forgive the pun, but this is actually going to be about Haystack Rock, so it's kind of perfect in Oregon. I'm going to share a video that is really near and dear to my heart, and I think it will kind of center us, and I could use that too. So share my screen.
I would like people to know that we're people, full stop. Now, this ain't complicated. And like, if you're going to, and if you're feeling some kind of way about people with disabilities, understand that it's a feeling. Now, are you governed by your feelings, or are you governed by your intellect? Or is it a mix of the two? But if you are older than 18, and you're in positions of power, and that means if you're a coffee shop owner, you have the ability to make your place accessible. If you're a manager at Wendy's, you have the ability to make that space welcoming. If you're a principal of a school, you're not dealing, it's like people with disabilities and they're not walking in, and it's like, you're not trying to train a camel to use a computer. These are human interactions. And human interactions are either successful or not successful, predicated upon the value that you give that human. So if you're looking at my daughters and you mad and you want to underpay them solely because they're women, that shows me that you're not intelligent and that you are devaluing them based upon your own preferences and biases. And so people is the operative word. And so I want people to acknowledge humanity. I want people to understand that it only takes one bad fall. It takes a random incident to shift you from looking at people like that to becoming those people that are looked at like that. So treat people the way you want to be treated. Do unto others as you have known unto you. It's real simple. I think if I leave people with anything about this work, the reason is that when you see a commercial and people are basking in like sandals resorts, come to sandals. And I'm like, oh, I want to go. Right? And I'm thinking, well, is it wheelchair accessible? If I land in the Dominican Republic, can I get to and having traveled internationally, you land in places and then you are met with culture of how your disability is perceived, how accessible those places are, what they view as accessible, what they think is accessible technology. Going to Jamaica was amazing, but they had to lift my wheelchair up with 4 people to put it in the van, as opposed to having wheelchair transportation. Going to London was amazing, except they stole the wheelchair off the jet bridge, right? Like, going to the Dominican Republic was amazing, except for the fact that nobody would talk to me because I'm in a wheelchair, so they spoke to everybody around me. If you constantly are saying, yes, we love you, except up until you are disabled, gay, black, a woman, then you are not the best human ever. Like you are just like you are not helping life. You are perpetuating that which is caustic and toxic to our existence. And if you are in tourism, the goal is to sell the beauty of your, like, come to the coast. We are awesome. Like, all right, then get to the coast. I can't get out of the van because ain't no curb cuts. Well, then you sold me a bill of goods. And as opposed to saying, these people with these wheelchairs want to come, put in a damn curb cut. Put in automatic doors. Here's why. For every dollar invested in accessibility, your return will be $3. Simple mathematics. If you're a capitalist, you ain't racist or ableist or homophobic. Everybody money green. Now that don't mean you got to like them. You can talk, again, you can go home, shut your door, you can talk all you want about me. But if you're serious about your business, you will make it as open and as accessible as possible, regardless. And that covers all ages. Because once you make it accessible, that means you've made it multi-generational.
Okay, let me stop my screen share. So I love that video. It's always really good for me to start a presentation that way because it's super calming and inspiring, but Keith doesn't mince any words. And it also brings it back to the personal for me. So I know I missed a little bit about what Linda shared we were going to talk about today, but just to let you know, I know that this room has a lot of different people coming in from different levels and experiences with design accessibility, and that it's a group of people from all over ASU, and the goal is to incorporate accessibility into your work. So in some of the previous talks, you've done a lot where it's been really specific on a toolkit or a tool, and ours is going to be a little bit more general, just to give you kind of it's a good place to be a reset for new people. It's a good place to reset for people that have been here. And just to give you a different way of looking at accessibility, because the way that I view it and in my advocacy work is much broader. So I love that video because Keith talks about, a place that's right here on the Oregon coast. And as a person with disabilities, I have been to the coast many times and I've never considered that it's all stairs. So to get down to that rock, Haystack Rock, you need to take stairs. And almost all of the Oregon coast, because it's on cliffs and things, there's a lot of stairs. There's not an elevator anywhere. There's a couple beaches you can drive directly on, but I've definitely struggled with the stairs, and I've had, little kids that have struggled with the stairs and things like that. But I never really, even with all of my training, even with doing accessibility work since I was a kid and a teenager, and all of the things that I experience and talk about every day, until I saw this video, it had not even occurred to me, like, how do you get a wheelchair down? I knew I couldn't get a stroller down there, but I just didn't think about it. And so I share that story to be honest, because it doesn't matter how long you've been doing this, there will be times where you forget to consider it. And so our goal today is really just to get you to think about and look at the world a little bit differently and start really looking around. And the more that you look, the more you'll notice. And of course, now when I go anywhere, I don't, especially beaches, I'm like, how do you get to the beach? And I know exactly where the beaches are accessible, but I still didn't think about how do you get down to this one? And so I think that's a great place to start. So Linda, we were going to ask each other questions, and you can pick whichever one you want to start with.
I'm thinking in the interest of time, we should probably start with our question to the audience, actually, about why they care about accessibility.
Great idea.
Yeah.
That's a great idea. I love that. Okay, yeah. So instead of asking each other, we're very interested to hear about why you care about accessibility, how you ended up in the room. So usually the way that I do it when I facilitate is I'll invite 2 or 3 people to speak into the room why they're here, and the rest of the people can just put it in the chat. So if you'd like to share your voice, it's always great. So it's not just me and Linda speaking. We'd love to hear from you and why you showed up today. If you're shy, it's okay. You can put it in the chat. Maybe we'll put Kathy on the spot too. Do you want to share? You want to share? If you come off mute, you could share why you care and why you're here today.
Yeah, I came from kind of an unusual place. It wasn't from having a disability or having someone, like close to me with a disability. It came from seeing back in the 90s that the internet could be, I call it the great leveler. That at least that's what we thought back then, that anybody could get on and didn't matter whether what the color of your skin was or what your religion was or what your gender was, or if you had a disability or not, everyone was equal on the internet. So that's what I came to it from, that philosophy, fell in love with it because of that. And disability is like it's one that we can solve. The technology can solve it. So pretty passionate about it.
Awesome. Okay, room full of people. We got one person. So I'm going to invite all of you to just don't be shy. Any reason that you showed up today, we'd love to have it. So work in the Office of Inclusive Excellence, and we're working on initiatives to further support Connect in this area. Love it. Bring values into your work. Love that. And make a difference. I love that, love that, love that. As a graphic designer and as a designer who is all about bringing values into my work, I love that answer. It's fabulous. Make our social learning platform accessible so that every user can have an equal experience. Great. That's great.
I come from a background of visual communication and design, but then ended up in like customer service. And now I work with students. I'm an enrollment coach for online students. So I just think there's so many little things that we can do, anybody can do, that make such a big impact. And I myself, as a pretty typical able-bodied person, I benefit so much from inclusive thinking. So I'm just here to learn more. I love hearing all of the different ways that I can stay informed and active, and just making sure that I'm doing as much as I can to create inclusive spaces.
Awesome. Thank you. That's great.
This
Karen?
is Karen.
Yeah.
Yeah, about 15 years ago, I started this work, and I got a job working at a for-profit institution that had recently signed a letter with the Office of Civil Rights saying that, they were not going to update any of their web presence until it was fully accessible. And I was tasked right off the bat with working with a vendor for the library's website that was not accessible. And it kind of sent me down this rabbit hole of learning how to communicate about accessibility. And it really opened my eyes. And since then, I've become really passionate about it. And I've gotten a disability studies graduate certificate here at ASU. And I evangelize quite a bit about it, I think.
Awesome. Fabulous. All right. Well, we're going to keep going. Those were great answers. Thank you so much. And I think that all of them are very, very perfectly timed and tied into what we're going to talk about today. So you will forgive because of the technical difficulties, I am not set up properly. So you might see the back end of my presentation, and that's okay. I don't really mind. Just pay attention to the main slide. It's okay if you see the sticky notes all around or if things go out of order, because I'll be jumping around a little bit, and it just works that way. Linda, you're good with that, of course, I'm assuming, because
I love the Vanna show. That is our presentation style. We tend to be probably not like what you're used to here. We're more interactive. We're a little more, we lean into our neurodivergence. So
there you go. Okay, perfect. So I'm going to get this set up as best I can so I can share my screen again. And love it. Yes, I would agree. Accessibility training for the average engineer is non-existent. I would agree with that. And I think that's true also from a lot of designers, just in general, whether you're a graphic designer, whatever designer you are. So that's great. All right, let me share my screen. And Linda, you let me know if I need to stop, just because I might not be able to see you. Just shout it out, because I'm just gonna kind of riff for a minute. Okay, so we already talked about some intros, why we care. For me, the future has to be accessible. I am very interested in quote unquote the future of work and whatever that means to you. But to me, it means like making work for everybody, which it clearly hasn't in the past. And that's why there's a lot of shifts and people working in different capacities to change things to become more equitable. And so for me, without accessibility, there isn't a future of work, because you can't have a future of work that includes everyone if it's not accessible. I love that, and I'll talk about this in a little bit, but I love that, if I say your name, not exactly how, I'm sorry, but Ariel said, like, they were like, I don't know, I don't have a disability, and we'll talk about that, but we all benefit from every single thing in this room right now that has had accessibility thought into it. So, I mean, if there's captions, for me as a neurodivergent person, I can't function without captions or transcripts, because I got to jump back and see what people said. And so there's all these things that people design every day that we all benefit from. So then we're going to talk a lot about our approach. We may or may not get to limiting beliefs, given that we started late, and then we'll talk about what now, but we want to give, a little time for questions. Now, our goal is that basically you leave here feeling a little bit hopeful. There's so much stuff happening in the world that you probably are exposed to the same as we. And if you are caring about these things in this room, generally, it's suffice to say that you care about cuts to Medicaid, or you care about other things that are going to affect, people's lives. So we are here to take a break from that for a minute and give you some hope and some inspiration, because we could all use that. And then consider everything we share as part of a toolkit. And the main thing to take away is we want you to see yourself as the key to universal access. So universal access means everybody has access, and you actually can make a huge difference. And I think a lot of times we're so stuck in the things we can't do, and we don't look enough at what we are able to do. Now, for those of you that are already accessibility experts, you might already be doing this. You might already know this. So if it's repetitive, that's okay. Always good to reinforce learning. Linda, from a behavioral standpoint and a learning L&D standpoint, right? It's always good to
repetition
home again. Repetition.
Yep.
So that's okay if you've already been doing this, but we are going to review a little bit broader about accessibility, because I think some of these stats and things are really mind-bending and interesting, and they may help you in your department or in your work kind of sell the business case, if you will, but also just to understand really how many people are affected. So this is our intro to access, and everybody is welcome. We are open. So what we mean by that is questions are invited. Because we're neurodivergent, you can interrupt us and ask us a question, and we will not be thrown off. We will be actually super excited to answer it. So anytime you want, that's fine. If I'm talking too fast, I'm a New Yorker, but I don't live there now, but I will always talk fast. So if I go too fast, please tell me to slow down. And we hope that you feel welcome to come off camera if you want, stay on mute, whatever you want, whatever you're comfortable. So accessibility affects everyone. If you have access, and again, the meta example of today, I could not access this room, right? It does not matter what I tried, and the frustration, and then the time that takes. And you have to think about when you don't have access and the barrier for access, the downstream effects of what happens after that. Because it's not just about the moment that you can't access something, but it's all of the frustration that goes with it and how it can derail the future. So this is one definition of accessibility. It is not mine, and I have challenges with it, but we'll skip over that. But it's permission or liberty or ability to enter, approach, go near, interact, or communicate with a person or thing. Now, for me, it's much easier to think about what does having access mean? And for me, it's I have the right to exist however I am. I have the right to experience things the same way everyone else can experience things, not necessarily experience them in the same way, but I have access to that experience. And I have the right to communicate and be communicated with in a way that works for me. To me, that's a more accessible definition of accessibility. It makes it more tangible to me. And also, I don't need to communicate with a thing necessarily. That's just my, that's an automation thing we could talk about later. So if you want to be the key to universal access, it is not about providing access. It is about removing barriers to access. Your job is to help make things more open. And like I said with the video, if you're looking, if you're at the coast and you're thinking, oh my goodness, like I don't know how this works, you have the option to write your parks department and say, how can we make this better for people? Now, it's really important that access, when you're doing it, isn't second or afterthought. It's why people always talk about in accessibility embedding it at the beginning. That's true of any equitable thing, language, whatever. But the main thing is, accessing something at the side of the building isn't giving everybody the same experience. People are going through the front and you're going through the side, you're not going to have the same experience. It's much better to not block the thing in the first place. Don't block the driveway. If the driveway is never blocked, then you won't have a problem. So if you can get ahead of it, that's better. Access is not a gift, and it cannot be, as I said, an afterthought, but it's not something that you're benevolently giving to people. Because, oops, where did I go? Because a lack of access, sorry, I'll just keep it here for a minute. The lack of access is the problem. It's the barriers that are the problem. And it's better to think about the environment being disabling than people being disabled. So what is happening around us is what causes someone to feel disabled, but their body is not the problem. It's not defective. So the effects of access, when it works well, we have all of the good stuff that all those words we're not allowed to say anymore, have, which is wellness and belonging. You have innovation. You have all of these great things that can happen when people have access to things. More people can participate. You have more like he said, more intergenerational participation. When they don't, you have stagnation, regression, frustration, right? If people aren't able to hear, like if you've ever been in a room where there's a big presentation and you can't hear anything, or you can't see the presenter, but they're holding something up, it's so frustrating because you're like, and then you kind of lose interest, right? So there are the frustration causes a lack of innovation. And this can have a downstream effect on how things work, which we'll talk about in the automation part. Okay. Come on. You want to. Okay. So another thought starter for you. And this one, we're just going to ask you, we're going to give you a minute just to think about it. And you please put it in the chat if you'd like to share. But when was the last time you created space or gave access? And again, don't think of it as giving, but removed a barrier for someone. When was the last time you did something that, like Kathy got me into this room? Used the Gmail, said it 4 times. I kept using my email and but made it so I got access, right? And so when was the last time that you were able to do that for someone?
Yeah, I'll share one while people are putting their thoughts into chat as well. And this is insane. So I'm a figure skater. I figure skate at Kraken Ice up in North Seattle, and they have beautiful ramps. So if you're familiar with that particular area, similar to what Emily was talking about with the Oregon coast, it's very hilly, right? So you have to use ramps to get around anyway on a wheelchair. As it turned out, as I was coming out of skating, there was a woman who was in a temporary wheelchair who was cruising around, and no one was helping her. No one was even, acknowledging her. And I was thinking, is she just exercising her dogs? She came up to me, and as it turned out, the ramp was too steep for her to be able to push a temporary non-motorized wheelchair up it. So she's literally circling, trying to find someone strong enough to help her get up the ramp or bring her inside the building to see if there's an elevator. And, she'd been there for 45 minutes doing that. And that's an area that you would have thought was, well, there's ramps, it's accessible. Not if you're not in a motorized wheelchair, it's not. And so that's like such a miss, because it's, again, as an afterthought instead of embedded directly in. I mean, they're still doing construction in that area. It's absurd to me. So and was saying there's something you could do, literally after that experience, yeah, I did write in a letter and say, did you know that this is happening at Crack and Ice? I wrote to the people who actually run Crack and Ice as well as to our local government, because it's absurd. All that taxpayer money that's being put into establishing that center for, for the myth or illusion of accessibility instead of actually being, removing a barrier. So that was my example of removing a barrier. It was me literally pushing a woman up the ramp so she could get on with her day.
Yeah. That's great. And I think of that all the time in New York City too. People carry their help people up and down with the strollers. So if you ever get off the subway, somebody will grab the front or back, just a stranger. It's kind of an like a social norm that we do, where we just, somebody grabs the stroller and you help the person carry it up the stairs, because most of the time in New York, the subways aren't accessible. But then not everybody can carry a wheelchair up and down the stairs, and people that use other assisted mobility devices have a problem. So that is great. And what you can do to do that, even like one step further, is to think about like how Linda could take that. She shares that story, so that's one way to take that learning forward. But other ways are looking at what the signage is there, or what the policies are in that building, or whatever it was there that created that barrier, and what could you do to kind of even take it further.
And just one thing to touch on too, before we jump off this and get back in, was you bring up the example of a stroller. That's a perfect example of how sometimes we're temporarily disabled because now we have a toddler, we have a child, right? So if you've not had children before, sometimes I remember one of my friends actually saying that was her first experience, was like that she actually, when she had her first child and was going through the turnstile in New York, getting on the subway, and she's just like, this is not a great experience. It's like, welcome to the world. But it shouldn't have to, you shouldn't have to have the experience yourself for you to be able to imagine what the experience is like for people who aren't like you necessarily, or like you yet.
Right. And I think that also ties into when something just works and it's easy, you don't notice it. You only notice it when it doesn't work. And so what I invite you to do is to look at what's working. And if it's working for you, is it working for everybody? That's just another way to think about it, because a lot of times, most of these things are not a problem until you need them. And so when you're talking about the engineers that don't get any accessibility, it's because they don't need it yet, right? They haven't experienced something like that. But there's all of these people on the other end that are using these products that have disabilities, and we're going to get to the stats on that. And it's imperative that we try to shift that together. So I will just go here. See, I told you you were gonna see the back end. Oh no, did it skip to? Hold on, I'm gonna stop sharing. It skipped way ahead, or way back to something. Hold on a second. You're not seeing my screen, right? I don't believe you are. I can't hear, but
No, we're not.
okay, great. I'm just gonna skip ahead. There we go. All right. Back to Zoom. Just always a thing. Okay. Thank you for your patience. So, why access matters. We talked about that for ourselves. Still invite you to put in the chat a story or an example. I know that you don't all know each other, so it might feel a little vulnerable to share, but it really does help other people to hear personal stories of ways that they removed access, or removed barriers and made access, because you'd be surprised how the chain reaction can happen too. I know one of the challenges that a lot of people have right now is that they're in the sandwich generation, so they're taking care of aging parents and children. And I was in a session where somebody shared what they did to get their parent through some hurdle with getting care, and like 4 people were like, wait, how did you do that? And it was so helpful for them. And so then they went and took that back to their parents and their family, so that they, we don't have, without nationalized healthcare, we have a lot of barriers, especially for people that are aging or with disabilities, to access care. And so any personal stories you can share about getting care is so helpful. People will always appreciate it. Okay, so. All right, so as I said, it makes a difference for belonging. It makes it possible for innovation, because the more people you have in the room, the more ideas you can bring to the room. It adds wellness for everybody. I'm gonna skip this, I think. Linda, should I skip this? Yeah. But this is a great TikTok, and maybe we'll share it with Kathy at the end so you can watch it. Jeremy Andrews is a great creator and talks does a really good job with explaining disability and why our assumptions are wrong about like people are faking or whatever. And so there's a lot that we're going to talk about in disability being invisible, but we're going to get to that. Okay, so some of the stats: 61 million people in the US are living with a disability. More than 1 in 4 Americans, hold on, have some kind of impairment. And the numbers are probably underreported usually. That is my estimation. Okay, 2/3 of employees have an invisible disability. This number is really important because 62% in this room probably have some kind of invisible disability, maybe more than one. So when we're thinking about accessibility, we're not just talking about wheelchairs, we're not just talking about mobile, and we're not just talking about vision or hearing either. There's processing disorder, there's vestibular disorders, there's also all kinds of health things that can cause all sorts of challenges for people. But it's important to think about that because in our normative culture of work, where you see people at a desk in a suit and that is considered good work, and then you see people, I've seen people like admonish other people for being in bed while they're on Zoom. Some people, that's how they have to work, and that works for them, and it's great that they can do that. So it's really important to think about, you don't know what people have going on, and it's better to just assume that they need what they need and that they are the best agents for that, to make that decision. People 18 to 44 have 1 or more disabilities, only about 20% of the population. But by the time you get to 65 or more, it's over half. So our likelihood of counting as disabled goes up significantly in our older age. And by the time we're in our 80s, it's the majority of people have some kind of disability. At least 15%, although again, I think this is way higher, have developmental disability or are neurodivergent. Neurodivergence includes mental health challenges like ADHD, autism, and OCD, bipolar, Tourette's, etc. So the goal is to build a society that advances the human rights of all people, requires a social justice movement be inclusive, intentional, with intersecting identities and diverse equity struggles. So this is an article written by that same person, Keith, in the video about ableism on the way to justice and why it's so important that we are confronting ableism on the way to justice. Sorry. So why it's so important to confront it and make sure that we challenge ourselves when we're not seeing somebody's disability, to make sure that we question that. I'm going to skip over this, but there was a lot of data on the economics of it. And the ROI and the business effect. It helps, right, to help more inclusive experiences for everybody. Okay, this is a good question. Linda, do you want to ask this one?
Yeah. And so, I mean, you had an example today of you just wanted to do a thing, you just needed access, but yeah. And I would ask you as the audience too, to reflect on, how did you feel? Like, what perceptions were you starting to get of maybe myself and M because of a lack of access? And is that something that you might do to other people, particularly the people that you might be serving? Like, that's one of the things that I think of, especially around instructional design and doing learning, accessibility for learning in particular, is what are the things we're thinking about the people that we may be making assumptions about, when it was just a matter of we just needed access so that we could do the thing. So
yeah, and I think that's so important to challenge, what your perceptions are of things, and also try to reflect on how that feels. Like, I think one of the universal experiences when you're doing a collaborative project and you don't have access to the file, but some people do. And it's frustrating, and then people start getting frustrated at you for asking for access again because it's throwing them on, they're already cruising. And I think that is a universal experience, but there are so many other times when you've been waiting for something and other people just were able to get it. Maybe it could be healthcare, it could be grades. It could be getting a student into something. It could be just getting the program downloaded, whatever it is. The Wi-Fi is slower than somebody else's.
Or even social interaction. So if we go back to the video that we watched at the beginning, where he's talking about people were talking to everybody around him except him, and so those are the kind of things that, again, if we start to think a little deeper about the work that we do and the impact that we're having on people, thinking about that too. So, and I don't need to, everybody's heard the Maya Angelou quote about, people remember how you make them feel. But that's the piece, right? Is actually when you don't have, it's something as simple as a lack of access. It's something that is just about a removal of a barrier that causes this kind of, the ladder of escalation about how we feel about people, how we see people, how we view situations, how we view ourselves in the context of, do we find ourselves getting impatient? All of those things. Again, it all stems back to removal of barriers.
Right. That's great. And I think Karen put two really great examples in the chat. So I just want to call attention to those. One was about the card saying swipe instead of tap or something. So people are having a hard time using it. So, and then the second thing actually dovetails with that perfectly, which is we assume everyone understands instructions even when they're not clear. And clear is in the eye of the beholder. So
this is why you test, right? This is why you do user experience testing. And then also, who are your users? Are you inviting them in? Are they even part of the design from the beginning, right? So that, and I know I know we touch on that, but we will be circling around because repetition is a good thing. But that is the piece, right? Like that is definitely the piece, is that if we're not testing and we're designing for a specific audience and we're going by our own ideas of, and it doesn't feel good too, even if we think about it, right? Is that if not including people who are the people we serve in the design of what we're doing, in the testing of what we're building to serve them.
Right. And I think that it's a good example of like instructions might be clear, but
clear to who?
But clear to who? Because 48 million people have hearing loss in the US. I think over 1 billion people in the next, I think 5 years. I think it's going to be more than 1/5 of the population will have hearing loss. So I think that there are a lot of examples, and I'm going to skip over some of the prompts and things. I'm actually just kind of cruising through this, but
I'm sorry.
when you think about your and I know we're kind of wrapping up on the time. When you think about your experience with instructions, this is such a good point because
hey, I think Kathy's actually trying to interject.
I'm so sorry.
Because we're close to time. Yeah.
Wasn't looking.
I
Thank
have a
you.
soft voice. I just wanted to let you know that we have like 4 minutes left. Actually, for everyone, typically we hang out for another half hour till about 3:30. And if you are able to, please continue with us because you guys have some great material. And if you don't mind, if you can hang out for another half hour, I know we'd like to hear everything that you have.
Well, yeah, we thought the Q&A started at the top of the hour, so we were already planning on staying.
Oh,
so we're good. Yeah, we're good.
Yay. Okay. Thank you guys.
I don't know if everybody else is booked for that long, but we were under the impression we had another, so a little buffer. So
we are recording this, so if you can't stay, you can always see the end of the recording.
Great. And actually, how about this? Since we have 3 minutes left, if anybody has questions for us now, we're happy to take those questions now if you have to drop. Questions, curiosities, comments, anything. Shy group. It's okay. It's the first time you've met us. It's totally fine.
Also later in the day for them too than SM. A little bit later.
That's true. That's true. Yeah. That's true too.
I like to give people grace.
Yes, absolutely. Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
So speaking of giving grace and instructions and all of that, I think another prompt that I like to think about is, besides the hearing thing, right, is what your personal experience is with. So just, you're going to close your eyes and think about this one for a minute. But what was your personal experience with learning to read? And in this one, I'm going to say, we're not going to give commentary. We're just going to give you a minute to actually just sit in quiet and reflect on that. Because I think for people, there's a very diverse range of experiences for learning to read. And some people have brilliant memories and some people do not. So I'll just share this on the screen. I'm just going to give everybody a minute to just reflect on that. All right. So again, just an opportunity for you to think about the feelings that came up and the assumptions that people made about you based on your reading ability. That's just another example of like how people will make inferences about our intelligence based on what we can do. But reading can be a barrier for some people. Some people are auditory learners. Some people aren't, that's not their first language. Some people can't see well. Literacy is challenging, but it's not challenging because people are illiterate. It's challenging because it's not made accessible to people. And it's not tailored to them. So this is a perfect dovetail into like, we're going to talk a little bit more with Linda's work about making this more part of your process and making it part of your automatic thinking. So, you know, Linda does a lot of work with AI and automation and tech, and we were talking about this, and I said, well, I use tech and I love automated tools, but for me, I'm like, the most important thing is to make it automatically important that we consider this, and how do we build that into our processes? Like Linda brought up earlier about QA and QC, like how can you bring it into your quality control that you're always doing this? Or how do you make sure that if you are building a tool that you bring people in early to test it or even design it with you, so that you don't have to have the answer. That's definitely, you don't have to know how to make it accessible. You just have to have people try it out and tell you it's inaccessible or what would make it better. So Linda, do you want to talk about that a little bit more?
I'll just talk about it in terms of how I do the work, how I've done the work when I've worked in big tech companies like Sun Microsystems and Oracle and Microsoft and those groups, but also how I also do it now that I'm a consultant and working with teams. And that is, it's the user experience, right? So it's co-creation. That's how I think of it. So as much as possible, when I'm designing something from scratch that we're building for a broad audience, that's going to include humans. Okay, I will make sure that I am including in that population folks who are representative of that target audience as I'm designing, right? So it's the co-creation process. And that way, you know, Em said it beautifully. You know, you don't have to be the expert. The expert is the person who has the lived experience. And so if we're actually bringing them into the process at the beginning, like for example, at Oracle, our main head of accessibility didn't have to learn about JAWS. He's actually a person who has a sight disability, right? So that was part of his challenge as well. But part of it for me, and what I got frustrated with was, we have guidelines. This can be absolutely automated. It's about thinking about where in the process, especially for those of you who build instructional materials, where in the process the automation could actually occur. Like it's this whole notion of being proactive and co-creating solutions as opposed to retroactively having to go in and fix things. And this applies not only to, you know, online courses and, you know, automated like think about even phone flows, right? When you're caught in an automated phone dialogue and you just wanted to do the one thing. So those are all the kinds of different situations where in our day-to-day life, if we're just coming at it from the fact of who is this serving and who is this creating barriers for, like just right out of the gate, I think that helps us get into the mindset of where we're automatically building solutions that are going to be accessible.
That's awesome. So yeah, I'll just, I think we're going to wrap up pretty soon and then just open it up for Q&A and other, we have questions for you too that we can ask, but we would love to hear from you if you have questions for us. I'm just going to share my screen again and just, okay, so I'm skipping over one of them, but I'm going to talk about this limiting belief because I think it's really important. And given the crew that we're talking to today, it's just to drive home what Linda was saying. There's this limiting belief, this idea that this is not my job, right? People have, especially in education, because I'm a teacher, so I know like higher ed, and people are very reticent to, well, for one reason, they don't want to step on other people's toes, but for another reason is we take on so much invisible labor, so much additional work. in university systems that is unpaid. And so a lot of times we're like, this is not my job. And whether it's because we're frustrated or whether it's because we feel like we don't know it, there can be a lot of reasons for it, but it can limit how well you make things accessible. So I think that the shift that we were trying to get to today is that you can find small ways to bring people into conversations and share information. It doesn't have to be this huge thing like I made this PDF so accessible, and it doesn't mean you're going to get it right. So I wrote this article about, for one of my clients, I was making a website, designing a website that was accessible. So I helped them do their web accessibility statement. And then I realized I didn't have one on my own website, and this is like what I do for a living. So the example is like, we're not going to always get it right. Accessibility, there is no finish line to make things more, increasing access and removing barriers. You're just going to keep adding to your toolkit and adding to your things and making it more accessible. My website, admittedly, is not fully accessible. I know exactly where the problems are, and I don't have necessarily the capacity or the finances yet to fix it. And that's okay. I just acknowledge that. So the best thing you can do is to acknowledge you're working on it, you're trying, and you want to improve. And web accessibility statements are a really good example of that. But really, any way that you can share information openly and honestly and vulnerably is going to help someone. So we have a massive amount of tools. I'm not going to share with all of them today. But when we're actually getting into the design, we have lots of tools that are open source that make it easy for us to access information to make things more accessible. One of them is the principles of disability justice. And then I also look at I'm a signatory of the design justice principles. And so I kind of look at them together and think about ways that I'm making sure that my information, my work, my community that I run, my business, anything I'm facilitating is considering these two like lists of principles. And I think that they're great for you to look up if you're not familiar with the 10 principles of disability justice. I'll find the link in the chat. But we just talk about these tools. We talk about what we have. Linda and I share stuff. Actually, that's how I got invited to this. Was I just said to Linda, she told me she was going to be talking with all of you, and I said, I'd be happy to share some tools in my approach to accessibility. And she's like, oh, please, like, come, let's do this. So, we improve the ways that we talk every day. We change our language. We try to stay up on these things. We feel, we talk about feelings. We say when we need help, we model what it looks like to be frustrated and have feelings around things, right? And like, I called Linda even right before the tech problem, was like, Linda, I'm stressed about this, and I just need to be reminded of where we're going. And she's like, we got this. It's really, really helpful to be vulnerable and real with people. And I have learned that most from the disability community, because the disability community, you can't hide how you show up sometimes. You just are, maybe you can't show up that day. And so, the all feelings are welcome here is something my pediatrician taught me to repeat with my child. And I have taken that to heart because it is so helpful. We create. So hopefully this GIF will load. Okay. This is what we started the talk with, is like, remember to imagine and craft the worlds that you cannot live without, just as you dismantle the ones that you cannot live within. So instead of thinking about just taking away barriers, like, what would a really accessible thing be? What could you do to make the future state? And
I'm going to drop a link to inspire you, because one of the things I always say is that things should just automatically be accessible. It's ridiculous that we have to spend this much time going things and retrofitting. And so that notion was taken to heart by a local tech company that's up here in Washington State, who happens to be the brother of the influencer on medical racism, Joel Burville. And so I invite you to check out testparty.ai. And I don't work for him. I have no affiliation with him. I just think it's genius that they're fixing things before they break, which means they're looking at the code. They're using machine language, exactly the machine learning, what people call AI. I don't, because I have a whole rant about that. But the thing that most people call AI to actually do good things, right? So doing those kinds of accessibility checks, things that we know we absolutely can check. So we're being proactive rather than retroactive. That was one of the things I want, because the whole piece with feelings is we're taking someone on a journey that we don't necessarily want to take them on, and we could have prevented that whole thing in the first place, right? So I always look at, instead of remediation, prevention, so that we don't even have to have the experience in the first place. If it's an accessible experience for all from the jump, then we don't have to have anybody feel frustrated. We don't have to have anybody feel excluded. So my preference is always, be proactive. What can you do to get ahead of it before it becomes a problem, before something breaks, or before someone has to have an experience that is less than delightful, exemplary, even accessible, so yeah. So I just wanted to throw that in there too, because that's one of the things that machine learning can be used for, is for good and for things that absolutely can be automated. Like, we're so much in the mindset now, because we use tools, that we have to use tools to fix something, as opposed to, what if we took that same tool set, put it into the software from the beginning? So I would invite you, when you look at the tools that you work with every day as you go through your workflow, rather than, now I have to do the accessibility check, what would that workflow look like if they were checking for accessibility along the way?
That's really good. I don't know if I mean, that's a good place to end. If you, I have, there's a video we could end with, but I actually think that's great, because really we want you to also get ahead of it, right? And like try to get ahead of the challenges, rather than having to always be in fixed mode, where people come to you and they can't get in, they can't do this thing.
Reactive mode, right? Reactive mode. And I mean, the technology is there. Instead of spending it on, oh, let's see if we can get an LLM to do this, why aren't we instead saying, hey, how can we use this technology to actually scale up efforts to make everything accessible for everyone?
I love that. And also, Linda, I'm going to drop in the chat. I didn't tell you I was going to do this, but that's okay. The podcast that you did with Sam. So Linda and I
last year.
Yeah, we met through through a community that I run for entrepreneurs. And so we all collaborate with each other, and there's some really amazing people. And Linda did this great podcast interview about AI and your approach and thinking around it. That are you okay if I share that?
Yeah, that does go into the story about why I don't call it AI.
Perfect. That's what I thought.
Artificial. Yeah. So
it reminded me of that. I had a bookmark. So I think it's a really great talk. This is that we're like trying to show you in real time, like, we are just people. Linda, myself, Sam, the person that's in the podcast, like, we're just people that figured out this was important to us and started working on it. We didn't have a mandate from anybody. We didn't have university funding, and so you are empowered to do these things yourself. Like, take a page from us and just do it.
And I've gotten clients that way, like literally working on Canva, for example, and going through there and like, why isn't it doing accessible? It just scanned my photo to create a color palette for me. Why didn't it just do a check right there to see about contrast? And then it does this next piece before I build out my brand kit. So I'm literally documenting during the workflow where there could have been an automated intervention to make the piece more accessible. And that's what I invite you to do too. Do it with your day-to-day work, but also just the observation around you, right? Like, to me, it's just absurd, because again, at any time, I mean, temporary disability is still a thing. So, I mean, things can happen to you, but it's happening to people around all the time, every day, if you're paying attention to it. And it's not to say, like, oh my gosh, there's so much to look at. It is to say, here's a way I can make a difference. Here's a way I can make impact.
Mm-hmm. Kathy, are there any other things that you would like us to touch on today, or any other?
Well, what I would like to hear more about, you talk about machine learning, and like service like Test Party that does automatic scanning for accessibility. And so, like, for instance, at ASU, we use Site Improve, which is pretty much the same thing. It does automatic scanning for accessibility across our websites. We also have a tool that we use for Canvas, but I'm not as familiar with that, and I don't think it does the same number of checks. But anyway, so Site Improve can probably catch maybe 25%.
Yeah.
If you're targeting, and we're just talking about the low, like just hitting the WCAG 2 point, or
the low hanging fruit. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's pretty much basement level accessibility.
Yeah.
So, but even that, they can only catch about 25%. So I think about things like that have changed just in the last year now. I saw Adobe's API for PDFs was able to detect font size and weight and say, okay, this is probably a heading and it doesn't, it's wrapped in P tags. It's tagged as a P rather than a heading. So they
Yeah.
were able to do that with PDFs. And I think that's probably going to be coming um, for websites as well. How fast do you think? I mean, before I would have said, well, that's really something they can scan and they can say this is the wrong heading level, but they can't really tell you if something's supposed to be a heading.
And it's also, unless it's in real time as you're building it, it's also after the fact. And so it's still retroactive. So that's the part that I really challenge. And so even when I was at Oracle almost 10 years ago, one of the things that I built there was embedded user assistance directly in the products themselves, as opposed to pulling someone out of the product to do it. So something like a test party AI, the ideal use of that is testing as a software or the mobile app is being built. So by the time you experience it as an end user, it's a seamless experience to you. Like it is completely transparent to you that they're even doing these accessibility checks at all. It's just that the end result actually is accessible. So those are the kind of things that I'm driving towards with software development. It's not about and this is an issue that I have with companies that have older tool sets. So before the cloud era, is that they tend to Frankenstein or retrofit after the fact. It's like, oh, now we're going to give you this accessibility. And it's, articulate storyline, same kind of thing, right? It's after the fact consideration of accessibility. What I'm thinking of is more in the moment that you're actually doing the build, as you're building the thing, it's calling out to you. So not only is it saying that this font size, it's saying specifically what it should be instead. So that's the level of intelligent tools that I want to see happen. The fact that it's not happening is appalling. The fact that it could be happening, like especially when you consider the level of pattern recognition, machine learning that we've had available to us for over a decade, the fact that it isn't happening to me is personally appalling. So as opposed to it being, oh, we have a better accessibility check after you've already built the thing, it's as you're building. So whether you're building a mobile app, whether you're building a website, whether you're building a document, it's checking as you're going and it's saying, Kathy, this part's not going to be accessible, and it's making the change for you. Like ideally, that would even be the thing.
So do you think that, I mean, there must be IDEs out there that do have plugins that check for accessibility. I'm pretty sure there are.
Yeah.
And so those are the ones that are probably going to win market. I mean, they're going to win in the marketplace.
They're closest. It's just like any debugging software that way. That's why I think that it's so insane that these aren't already how people were building out their, if you're going to build authoring tools, build them so that they're accessible automatically, period.
Yeah.
Like,
and I do think some of them are out there, but our developers don't necessarily use them because they don't know about them.
yeah.
I really think that the deadline that's coming up, the April 24th, 2026.
For the 5:30 thing, or right? For the legal deadline that's coming up?
Yeah, not the European Accessibility Act. That's this year. Actually,
Right.
it's the 26th of this month, I think.
Yeah.
The 26th of June to this year is when all websites have to be accessible in the EU.
Right.
And then the US one is April of next year.
Right.
Yeah. But those two deadlines are really helping push, I think, I mean, as people learn about them, okay, my site has to be accessible. So you're seeing content creators, you're seeing developers asking for those kinds of tools, buying those tools that have that automated checker in them to make their work easier. I think, I mean, maybe not right away, but the ones that do help developers, help content creators are going to float to the top. I mean, I think they're going to end up being the most popular tools. So it's a really good opportunity for people who build that kind of software.
Yeah.
I don't know. I know there are a lot of people, because I talk to them in the accessibility world, in disability services, especially that they're a little leery of automated things, and they're not sure that, you know, that we're going to be able to use it to make some of these human judgments. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
like an automated scanner can tell you whether there's alt text or not, but can it tell you what the best alt text is to put in there?
See, and this is the part that I think is super interesting, though, Kathy, is that people are leery about automation when they know it's happening. And I can assure you, as someone who's worked on automated systems for a very long time, there are so many things, automated systems that are out there and working. And are they biased? Are they doing things that aren't, making the right judgments? 100%. But is that stopping people from using them for risk assessment about whether or not you get a mortgage or whether or not you can rent this apartment or whether or not you're qualified for this job? So we're still using these systems that we know are biased for things. Well, I can tell you auto riff. Auto riff is a technology that was built by the Pentagon 20 years ago that automated the process of reductions in forces. And so think about that. Okay, so think about WCAG and be able to make judgments versus making the judgment about whether or not someone deserves to be part of a RIF. And this is a product that was built 20 years ago. In fact, that's what Doge actually just resurrected. And so it's like, oh, this is what Elon Musk has done. It's like, no, he just resurrected Auto Riff, which was an old Pentagon software that automates the process of deciding you no longer have a job. So if they're willing to use automated technology, I mean, that kind of automated technology is being used on our population right now. So I think if we're able to automate and at least get it to a place where automatically we're knocking out so much of the checks that we're doing retroactively, that's a lot better than where we are now. And the fact that people would be suspect is like, you don't even know all the algorithms that you're subjected to on a regular basis, So just saying.
Interesting.
Yeah. So. Yeah, and Emily, I love that point that, yeah. That's a great comment. Canva doesn't catch that contrast to the level that WCAG requires. Even that's the whole point of the tool. Yeah. Yeah. Come on now. Why are we paying you for design, use this tool so that we can build our designs? Come on. So yeah, I just think we deserve better and we need to demand better, honestly. Having worked for, like I said, large software companies for like over 2 decades of my life, it's like bare minimum. And we're putting so much effort into this part, but what about this? So, and it's a matter of making it, and it's also a matter of recognizing that you can do it too, right? Like that's this whole idea of like, oh, I could never. It's like no code and load code solutions to make prototypes to show people. Like if I could tell you how many times I've heard in my life, you're not technical enough. It got so frustrating to me. It's like, you know what? I'm just going to build the thing and do a little show and tell. So even if it's just a low code or a no code, rough, functioning prototype of what you're envisioning, that's enough to take to a tech company and for them to, say, we could actually build this. So that's the challenge that I like to say is, like don't think you can't do it because you absolutely have insights that other folks don't necessarily have just from the nature of doing this work.
Yeah, and one thing I do religiously. I don't do it. I don't do the second and third step as much, but I document everything. So if
Yeah.
I see on a transcript that it said something that I definitely didn't say, or it said something weird, or even if I see it in a video I'm watching online, like a TikTok or something, and I see some word that pops up that's like not what they said, I screenshot everything. I screenshot everything that's in any work process that doesn't work anytime there's like a bug or anything, and then usually I'll report it if I feel if I have the time, right? I wish I did that more, but like I can't QA the whole world, and you can't either. Nobody's expecting you to do that. But when there's things that you care about, especially if you're a designer, like for Canva, I take screenshots, I report it, I say like this is strange, and then I just note in my head again this like third step of what could have been built in earlier? What would Linda do? How could I have like I'll talk to Linda about it, be like, hey, this happened. Like, what would we have done better? And she'll be like, oh yeah, well, we did this before. And so at what point did they miss that chance to automate it? If I start thinking about that, then it can inform me to when I'm building things in the future. And again, I'm not a software developer, so but I design programs all the time, and programs still need to be accessible, and the process needs to be accessible. And so if something doesn't work for someone, what can I do next time to make sure that it works, right? Like, what can I do to test it earlier? And even for me, like, what could I have done? I could have like logged into that thing and an hour ago. I logged into my own Zoom just thinking I'd just switch right over. It didn't work, right? So there are things that you can do, and I think, and people in university, this, right? Like, just everything is a learning opportunity to make it better. So when I see things that don't work, I just note it, and I try to tell people this isn't working, because otherwise they don't know,
Yeah.
you know?
Do you guys happen to know, does Hemingway, or there's another
Mhm.
tool that checks for like your reading
Yeah,
level,
Grammarly.
Grammarly, right? Do
Mhm.
you know if they check for accessibility, like a lot of accessibility things?
I mean, I don't,
They check for
language
clarity.
accessibility. They talk about clarity, and well, Hemingway does reading level, so it's like it'll tell you, and supposedly sixth grade reading level is supposedly is what the New York Times is supposed to be, and that's what's supposed to be like the most accessible. But I don't necessarily agree, because I think that, again, this is something that's like not able to necessarily be totally standardized, because there's cultural things with language, and there's all sorts of things, right? Idioms that are not accessible to people with autism, and if you say like, is there any cats and dogs, I don't know what the heck you're talking about. So I think that you can use these tools, but just be wary of them. But I do think that Hemingway does a good job of making it will call out so you can see how complicated your language is. Um, I tend to, I'm very long-winded, in case nobody could tell. I'm very verbose. And so sometimes I'll just run my writing through just, my chat GPT that I have, like, somebody created, that's actually a justice and accessibility one. So there's some things added in the back end, and I just run it through that and say, hey, how can I improve this? Does it make sense? My rambling, should this be 5 different articles instead of one? Usually that's the case. Um, but so I just use that kind of tool. I think there's a third tool. I think it's Texto. I gotta look it up. But that one is about accessible language and things like that, and it's an AI tool. I gotta look it up. Hold on.
Yeah. And I would say, I talked about UX testing, user experience testing, 3 to 5 people that are representative of, your audience, just having them go through it with you. If you're looking at a document or you're screen sharing, you say you built an e-learning course, just having them go through it with you, and actually you ask them open-ended questions that they show you the experience. And then you're like, oh, that's one of the things I share with all my clients is you got to learn how to do user experience testing. So rather than building the thing and then having your first group of users be your user experience test, do it up front. Again, it's only 3 to 5 people before you start to really see a trend. And then you're like, oh, that's how people read that. That's how that landed with that person. And so it becomes very clear that, the points that were brought up earlier about swiping versus tapping, like those kinds of things. And so even for learning experiences, I do UX testing always, because I want to know how this is going to land with my audience before it's my final audience. So testing is, and plus, it's great experience to have. It's so eye-opening to see something through someone else's perspective. And it's something as simple as that you can do this on a Zoom. For learning UX design, yeah, there's so many. Let me get together a little curation of some of my favorites, and I'll put them in there. I'll send them to you, Kathy, and so we can share them with the group. Because yeah, there's old school UX design, which is really almost how any app development company or any software company will have typically done it, right? It's not crowdsourced, which is what's more common now. It's really just literally having some open-ended questions that you're asking people. Like, for example, one of the ones I'm working on right now, show me where you think you would go to experience a community of practice. And so that's as open as I'd leave it. And so I'd have them talk through their thought process, and they're like, okay, I think I might go up to this forum tab here and do that kind of thing. Like, it's literally just a talk aloud problem solving kind of approach to seeing what the world of the user is actually like. Yeah. So anyway, anything else that you would like to ask us about, or any other pearls you want to share, Em?
No, I mean, I think if there's follow-up in, I would just say, we're both available if there's follow-ups in your different areas because you're all over the university. Feel free to reach out to us. Texty app might not even be the one I'm thinking of. There is one that's really focused on accessibility, and this one is, but I don't think this is the one. I think they sort of like try to copy them. I'm not sure. Their branding feels really different, so I could be wrong. But there are tools to make copy more accessible, and there are tools to check websites. But again, they're not foolproof. And like you said, Kathy, they only catch 25%, right? 98% of websites are still inaccessible. So at least if they fail accessibility tests, then they have at least one problem. So that's like for every website that exists. So there are, yeah.
I do think that machine learning is getting better at an accelerated rate. I know that I always use this as an example. About 5 years ago, talking about Zooms or, automated captioning, there was.
Oh, it's definitely getting better. Yeah.
We would say there's no way we can use this. Everything has to be checked. It was pretty bad. And within, I'd say, well, during COVID, within 2-3 years, it's as good as human transcriptor. Yeah.
Yeah, two things, more data and faster compute. And so those things rapidly accelerated during COVID. So you're absolutely right. So tools are getting better because of the training data sets and the speed with which we can process information, as well as getting exponentially better than it has been. But that comes at an expense too, right? So that's the other part of it too, there's types of machine learning that we've had for decades that absolutely could be leveraged to solve problems as well. So it's not just a matter of, for me, a lot of it it's a matter of the will to do it as opposed to the capability to do it. We have the technology. Do we have the will to do it? There's some really good questions coming in now, just as we're at the half hour.
No, I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
Wait, okay, hold on. Let's see. You can answer that if you'd like. Do you think about accessibility in terms of HCL between human and computer products? 2, with AI, also, what's the best source to look when choosing colors for oh, that one's good. What's the best thing for colors app? Okay, I'll find that. Hold on. There's so many of them, and there's some that are built into the browser so you can actually scan websites and stuff. But they ain't paying me, so I'm going to send you an open source one that I really like from this creator. And I will just give me a minute.
Yeah, and I'll address the first one. So having worked around a broad range of, Internet of Things, VR, XR, AR technologies, that kind of stuff, it's terrible because the people who are building the tech are not thinking about their population. They're thinking of themselves as the default. So they're not designing technology that is appropriate for everyone. Like even thinking about like a Meta headset, right? For someone like me, I'm not a particularly big person. And when I was a kid, I had really bad eyesight. So I wore those Coke bottle glasses. So I already have an aversion to wearing big, heavy things on my head. So yeah, those headsets are not accessible at all. And not even for people who don't like in the ways that you might think about accessibility. There are things that are just problematic in terms of a lot of the tech that we're building. And I also will bring it back to the fact that the tech is built and we're rolling it out there, alluding to that point I made earlier, where your first users are your user experience test. And so some of the pins that are put out, some of the watches, some of those more Internet of Things kind of devices, they're not accessible at all. And it's just like, you're designing it for you, bro. You're not designing it for the world. And the world is much broader than your narrow perception of it. And it all comes back to that could have been remediated right at the jump as they're in product development. It didn't have to be after the fact.
Yeah, I think that also with the color thing is a good example of that. Like it can be automatic at the beginning and yet people like miss it. So this website that I just shared with you, I know because I know I design, so I know how like sensitive the colors are. And so I looked at the website, I was like, oh wait, but this isn't the website itself is not accessible. And he has it automatically. I'm pretty sure that his website changes the color so it like automatically rotates to make it different every time. And so he could write it in the code, and I've seen this done where you write it in the code so that it makes sure that it always hits contrast, whether it's on a dark background or a light
Yeah.
background. But he didn't do that. But it's an open source tool and it works with the WCAG. I know that it passes the threshold for that. There's also WebAIM is the default one that people use. I think that's like kind of the official, but I like this one better. But yeah, I think that like what you're saying, like there's opportunities where people miss them all the time.
Yeah.
And so one of the things is that like even the tools you use might miss it. And so you also knowing what makes something accessible, like even if it doesn't sound right to you, that might be the best way to tell if it's actually going to be accessible to somebody. Kathy, I see you nodding to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a journey, accessibility. That's what I
Absolutely.
always think of, you know, and you're never going to be 100% accessible. The best you can do is just be more accessible every day.
That's it.
And just keep asking yourself, accessible for who? You know, for who? And this expanding who is.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Exactly. Exactly.
Awesome.
Well, we are at time. Actually, we're over time. And thank you guys so much for staying longer and answering all our questions. And it was fabulous information. Really, really great talk. We appreciate you being here.
Thank you. Thank you. And you can find Linda and I both on LinkedIn. That's how we met. So, and I dropped Linda's podcast in there. I'll just put it again at the end so you can grab it. And then I dropped an article I wrote in there. So if you want to follow my work, that's a good place to start.
Yeah. If you want, you can just go to, you know, and save the chat. I think it's
The three dots.
is it
Yep.
the three? Yeah.
Yep, you'll see it. It's right up there, first menu choice, save chat, and then you'll have all the links.
Great. Well, thank you very
you.
much. Have a great afternoon.
Thank
And
you. Thank you. Thanks for having us.
all right, we'll see you all next month.
Appreciate it.
Bye.
Bye.
Appreciate it.